Okay, Jai Hind everybody. Currently, I think the biggest issue which is being discussed world over is as to how Trump is going to unfold, with every day passing. He has started with a bang, so to say, but most of things which he is doing now that was stated, in run up to his elections, and but probably they did not surface with that kind of prominence, and people didn't think that it will manifest that fast. So he has started with one school of thought showing too much than what he can handle, and there have been some flip flops and all that. He's going to one extreme, returning back, tariffs he announced, then gave 90 days pause, and a lot of things happened. But he has got a special focus as per his perception as to how he sees America to be made great again. We may agree, we may not agree. That is different. We have experts who will dwell on that. So the Trump 2.0 is one phenomenon, and with that is Modi 3.0. While Modi has had a good relationship with Trump when he was the first term president, and a lot of road shows were done both in United States of America and in India. Even when he went there, he was one of the few leaders who visited that much early, and optics were also good. But the issue of trade and other things have come to the fore. While once the tariffs were announced and hiked, most of the countries started responding and reacting. To that extent, India has maintained a point and is trying to give it an institutional framework to see how that can be resolved. Meantime, this Pahalgam has also happened. Now, when the Pahalgam has happened, while the initial support came from USA, a number of other countries, and it all came along the expected lines, because the countries like Turkey and other Muslim countries in the West Asian subcontinent supported, Pakistan. China went out of the way to ensure that nothing adverse is commented about Pakistan in United Nations Security Council. But last one heard that Trump has signed a deal with Pakistanis. I think the day before yesterday, because predominantly he is a businessman. So there is a increased effort on his part. Actually, Mr. Rubio speaking to Jay Shankar yesterday and trying to diffuse the situation between India and Pakistan. So what happens to India-Pakistan issue, that is a separate subject altogether. But I think there is a need to crystal gaze and analyze as to how Trump 2.0 and Modi 3.0 are going to interplay with each other, and what could be the implications for the country, and what probably we could do to ensure we address our adversarial fallouts and take care of the positives. So we are very fortunate that we are here with Dr. Sriparna Pathak, who is expert on these matters. So before I request her to dwell on this subject, I'll request Dr. Sinha to introduce the speaker.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Sriparna Pathak is a professor of China Studies and the founding director of the Center for Northeastern Asian Studies in the Jindal School of International Affairs of O.P. Jindal Global University, situated in Haryana, India. She also serves in the capacity of the Associate Director of the Jindal India Institute. She teaches courses on foreign policy of China as theories of international relations. She's also the Associate Dean of Careers at JSIA. In 2022, she published a book titled Drifts and Dynamics, Russia's Ukraine War and Northeast Asia. Her previous work experience covers universities like the Guwahati University, Don Bosco University, the Ministry of External Affairs, where she worked as a consultant for the Policy Planning and Research Division, working on China's domestic and foreign policies. think tanks like the Observer Research Foundation, situated in New Delhi and Kolkata, respectively, South Asia Democratic Forum in Brussels, where she is a research fellow, and the Center for Armed Forces Historical Research in New Delhi, where she worked as a researcher. She's also associated with Taiwan's Double Think Lab as a regional partner and works on tracking China's influence operations. Awarded a doctorate degree from the Center for East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University in 2015, Dr. Pathak is fluent in English, Hindi, Mandarin Chinese, Bengali, and Assamese. She has also been a recipient of the Joint Fellowship awarded by the Ministry of Human Resource Development, India, and the China Scholarship Council, Government of People's Republic of China. And she has also spent 2 years in China, actively researching various aspects of China's domestic economy. Her areas of interest are China's domestic economy, trade and economic relations between India and China's foreign policy and economic linkages with the world. She is currently working on a project on China's influence operations in India. She has been a resource person for various media organizations, colleges, universities, and think tanks within India and abroad. Now, handing over the forum to Matt.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Sriyoshi. And it's truly an honor being here. I'll quickly go into the topic on, Modi 3.0 and Trump 2.0. But, unfortunately, Pakistan has been at what it does best, which is supporting terrorism. And I think that also is in some ways going to affect how India sees its relationships with a lot of countries, including the US. Now, the US historically, unfortunately, has not completely been in India's quarters. So that is one reason as to why the trust deficit has always been there, and it's going to be there. Even, as Sir said, that, just about a day or two back, Trump has made some deals with Pakistan because they will look to sell and sell more arsenals. Why not make money? Why not milk a tragedy? So he's going to do that. But then there's also a question, given the fact that India's economy is the fastest growing major economy right now, there will be a consideration whether India's market is a better choice or would supporting Pakistan be a better choice. So, we'll have to be very smart in leveraging our strong points and then going forward. Something, which Pakistan's defense minister said a couple of days ago after the Pahalgam attack, Khwaja Asif had said this, that Pakistan has been doing the dirty work of the US and of the UK for decades. Okay, that completely might be true. But here's the thing, he's not mentioned China at all. So that is what first casts doubt. Second is, why exactly did he mention just the US and UK? Why not other countries? With the US, before this Pahalgam attack, we were reading that India might just be the first country which has a trade deal with the US. So derailing India's economic growth, does it benefit Pakistan? Yes, because Pakistan was unfortunately created on the hopes of destroying India. It has no other rationale for existence. So yeah, economic derailment would help. But which country would it help the most if India's economic growth gets derailed? There would also be China, which is why Khwaja Asif has just not mentioned China at all. Also, Khwaja Asif mentioned UK. Why UK? India is in talks for an FTA with the UK. Unfortunately, Trump has unleashed tariffs on the whole world. While it is damaging the Chinese economy, and rightly so, in a lot of different ways, the sad bit is that it has been unleashed on friends and foes alike. But that's the situation. Great powers have their own equations, and the third or the fourth powers have to just somehow navigate. So India was relatively navigating well, and I'm very sure we will still do it. It's still going to happen. But there's much more deeper reasons as to why this particular time was chosen. JD Vance was in India. Our Prime Minister was abroad talking about the IMEC and so on. So there are a lot of these considerations. While this terrorist attack will be repaid in full and every death will be avenged, as our Prime Minister has said, and as as civilians, as at least me, as we can guess. But the fact also is that there is a bigger boogeyman or bigger boogie woman behind this thing called Pakistan. So I'll quickly go into what are the complementarities that are there between India and the US, and how these can shape groupings such as the Quad forward. Slide. If I could, yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so one of the first things which happened after Donald Trump was sworn in was the meeting of the foreign ministers of the Quad on January 21st, 2025. Now, this can't be a coincidence. In fact, during Trump 1.0, Quad was revived. So there is a Quad focus from Donald Trump, of course. And, the fact that it happened on January 21st, immediately after the swearing, it has to have certain sort of meanings. Then, while this shows a prioritization of the groupings, importance of the groupings priorities, the fact also is that this was hosted by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is a hawk. He's a hawk with regards to China. On the first day of his office itself, he had hosted the foreign ministers, and he underscored the Quad's importance in evolving geopolitical landscape, and that also has a lot of implications for the role which Modi 3.0, India under Modi 3.0, can actually play. First, it signals a sort of continuity and priority under Trump 2.0. It's an early diplomatic. The moment that, on January 21st, this happens as one of the first meetings which happens under the new government, it shows that there's a necessity for making this early diplomatic move. It's a top foreign policy priority for the new administration. Unlike concerns that of making America great again, Trump's America First policy, there have been these sorts of rumblings that because of MAGA, because of America First, there's not going to be any sort of focus on these multilateral groupings, minilateral groupings, etc. But the reason as to why, or the signaling which the Trump administration did by holding this on the first day of his office, shows that there's going to be a continuity from Trump 1.0, and it's an area of priority. It was also to assure partners like India, Japan, and Australia that despite tariffs being slapped on us, fact is that we have a common arena where we can cooperate and look forward. Second, the group, even though it's not a military group, it is open secret that it is to counter China. The Quad's focus on opposing coercive unilateral actions. Like these are the sorts of terms which are used. Who uses coercive unilateral actions? Especially in the Indo-Pacific. It's not Australia. It is not India. It's not the US. Who uses coercive unilateral actions? So China's actions in the South China Sea along India's borders have only grown in the last few years. Its aggression has been high. So when this, as the first meeting, happens after Trump 2.0 is sworn in, it showcases that there is that intent to counter China. Then, in addition to that, Trump has also talked constantly about how China pumps in fentanyl into the US. And yes, fentanyl has been illegal drugs, illicit flows of fentanyl have been a huge cause of concern for the US. While fentanyl per se, or China's supply of fentanyl, is not mentioned in the Quad discussions, this will also come up as a priority. Most importantly, I think, when this meeting was held, it was a reassurance amidst uncertainty. The meeting tried to address fears of US isolationism, signaled continuity, not just continuity with Trump 1.0, but also continuity with the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, which elevated the Quad to a leaders summit level. And it also counters China's narrative of a Quad as a destabilizing bloc confrontation. Coming, yeah, thank you. Coming to the strategic positioning that India is undertaking under Modi 3.0, first is of an India first, or of India's leadership role. We successfully held the G20 meeting. Okay, that was Modi 2.0. But even in 3.0, there is a continuity in the sense that India is signaling a leadership role. External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar's participation, alongside his attendance at Trump's inauguration, highlights the fact that India has a proactive role in the Quad. Now, India is going to host the next Quad Leaders Summit in 2025, and it was announced in the joint statement as well. That also positions Modi 3.0 to shape the group's agenda, particularly on maritime security and technological cooperation, and hopefully on countering terrorism. I'll come to the countering terrorism bit, towards the end. Second, there's always, as much as we might try to write it off, the fact also is that personal diplomacy plays a very important role. Dr. Jaishankar was seated in the front row at the inauguration, while even unfortunately Japan, which is a friend of India, it's a partner, Japanese foreign minister was in the fourth row. So, in diplomacy, positioning matters. A lot of things can be read or a lot of things can be understood by these sorts of things. So, Dr. Jaishankar's front row presence at the inauguration, his delivery of a letter from Prime Minister Modi, um, all underscore the strong Modi-Trump rapport, which already exists. It's a key factor in advancing the India-US ties within the Quad. This personal connection, built on events like even Sir mentioned some of it, Howdy Modi, Namaste Trump, they facilitate smoother coordination despite these trade frictions. Well, India has not really created a friction, so friction might be the wrong term, despite these trade problems which have arisen. Also, this gives a huge chance for India to showcase that India is not against anyone. India has repeatedly said in the Quad also that India is not against anyone. So when India says it, it also showcases that as difficult as tariffs might be, India is not against the US. Um, India also supports a rules-based international order, and that reflects Modi's commitment to strategic autonomy. While it does align with the US on countering China in the Quad, India also maintains flexibility, as has been seen in its Russia ties, which Dr. Jaishankar navigated very carefully in his discussions with the Quad counterparts. Thankfully, even Trump and Putin seem to be friends, seem to be. So hopefully, this will also, petter down in the near future. Third, one of the strategic priorities which India also has under Modi 3.0 is to strengthen Quad cooperation. First is the issue of maritime and economic security. The joint statement emphasized strengthening maritime, economic, and technology security with commitments to resilient supply chains and cybersecurity for critical infrastructure like undersea cables. China has been cutting a lot of undersea cables, so this also gives India to raise a very pertinent point. A few years ago, thankfully not in the last year, China's spy ships, which it calls research vessels, Yuanwang 5, etc., they regularly enter into the Indian Ocean. Now, thankfully, given the sort of ties that India has with Sri Lanka, even though Sri Lanka couldn't push back against the entry of the controversial vehicle, Sri Lanka had informed India. That gave India enough time to put up jammers in the Indian Ocean region so that sensitive data doesn't get leaked to the Chinese spy ship. That being said, China has a leeway in undercutting sea cables. So when we talk about maritime and economic security, focusing on critical infrastructure like undersea cables is also important. That's also going to be something which India is going to push for. Then there's always technology and green energy. Okay, we all understand that the US is not interested in climate change or combating pollution-induced changes in weather systems, etc. But that's what the US wants. That's its own interest. That's what its own perceptions are. But as far as India is concerned, India has a huge interest in enhancing Quad cooperation on technology and green energy. So Quad becomes a huge focus. India has taken a lot of strides in countering climate change. All of this aligns with Modi's technological self-reliance goals as well. And it also ties with Trump's focus on critical technologies like semiconductors as well as AI. Okay. Then each partner also has their own specific concerns. When, in January, on January 21st, this foreign ministers meeting happened, Australia had an AUKUS concern, and Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong sought assurances on AUKUS's defense pact, which Trump has not publicly endorsed. So the Quad meeting provided a sort of platform to secure US commitment, reinforcing Australia's role in the broader Indo-Pacific security architecture. Why is Australia important, or why is it important to be focused on Australia? Because, one reason as to why the Quad didn't take off earlier was because Australia, reeling under Chinese pressure, had actually withdrawn from the Quad. It was only under Trump 1.0 that the Quad got revived and Australia threw its weight again. So it's also important that we pay certain focus to Australia and Australia's concerns. Then there was Japan. There is Japan. Japanese Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya, he emphasized Japan's economic and security value to the US, especially after Trump's blocking of Nippon Steel and US Steel's deals that raised concerns. The Quad meeting helped reaffirm Japan's strategic alignment despite trade tensions. So you see, Quad also becomes a vessel. Quad Foreign Ministers meeting becomes a vessel to also address the other concerns which other partners. And then, of course, there was India's trade dynamics. Dr. Jaishankar, in his discussions, addressed potential trade friction given the tariff threats which India faced, especially back in January. Now, India's recent tariff reductions and ongoing trade deals, which is going to target something on the lines of 500 billion US dollars, suggests the efforts to align economic interests within the Quad framework. Why am I harping so much on economic interests? Because, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way it might be seen, economics leads to power in this epoch of history. In the 60s and 70s, maybe economics was considered as a part of soft power, but it's no longer so. The reason as to why China is, one of the most powerful states in the system is because of its economic rise, is because of its economic policies, which now the US wants to counter, which India also has interest in countering. So focusing on these economic dynamics becomes important. There are, just a second, there are certain geopolitical implications, and I'll quickly go through them. Now, the meetings, the Quad Foreign Ministers meetings, the outcomes of it could also possibly push for a Quad Plus engagement. We've been hearing rumblings over the years about Quad Plus. Squad, unfortunately, is not happening. Dr. Jaishankar had mentioned it, a few weeks ago. But then a Quad Plus might just happen. When Dr. Jaishankar, speaking at an event recently, answering my question, had talked about how India is happy with the Quad, and that's the reason why it will not join the Squad. When he said India is happy with the Quad, what does it mean? Quad, let's look at it. Let's do some plain speak. It's not a military grouping, but what exactly it is? It also signals a sort of regional alliance, especially in the Indo-Pacific. So we've been hearing these rumblings of a Quad Plus. If India is really happy with the Quad Plus, wants to focus on the Quad, then maybe there'll be a push for Quad Plus. There are other partners like Vietnam, like South Korea, which have been at the receiving end of China's aggression, economically, military, or so on. So that is also something which would work out in India's interest. India has been having a lot of discussions with Vietnam, BrahMos missiles, in the context of BrahMos missiles, as emerging as a net security provider and so on. So Quad, in fact, will help further the initiatives of which are there for India under Modi 3.0. Okay. Now, this convergence of Prime Minister Modi's third term and Donald Trump's second term, that is poised to also take a lot of other initiatives within the Quad. Now, it's first important to root this analysis in the geopolitical context of these two leaders' track records. First thing which needs to be mentioned, which is an area of similarity between, Prime Minister Modi's policies and Donald Trump's policies. There's a strategic alignment against China. India doesn't mention China openly because we have a power differential, and we are the country which is locked in a military conflict with the Chinese. It's not the US. But yes, there is an alignment against China per se. Both have shared concerns. Both Modi and Trump have consistently prioritized countering China's assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in the South China Sea, as well as along India's borders, Ladakh skirmishes, Galwan, and so on. Trump's first term saw the Quad elevated to a ministerial level dialogue, and his America First policy aligned with India's push for strategic autonomy, fostering a shared vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Modi's Viksit Bharat, or Developed India. All of this actually get complemented, and this is like an umbrella organization where these complementarities can actually be pushed for. Trump 2.0 has a very hawkish stance, and Trump has appointed a lot of China hawks to key national security roles. That signals a tougher stance towards Beijing. That actually aligns with India's interests because India also wants to leverage its economic growth. Yes, we are not an autocratic China, so things take time. Also, we have a focus on sustainability. That's a part of being a democracy. That being said, China has actively tried to block India's rise. Since we were discussing Pahalgam, why on earth does China support Pakistan? It's a rational actor. What does it really get out of Pakistan? Economic interest? No, not really. That country has been relying on arms and the largesse of bigger powers. What does China get out of it economically? No, because it can stall India's growth. There's a saying in Chinese which means that one mountain cannot have two tigers. Right? Many years ago, even 20 years ago, there was a Chinese military general. He had also said that within Asia there will be only one tiger. Unfortunately or fortunately, India is also located in Asia. Right? India's rise doesn't threaten the others. But when there is a cultural perspective to geopolitics, such as those of the Chinese, which say that one mountain can have only one tiger, that clearly means that it will thwart the growth of any other responsible actor. India actually has a lot more credibility, not just in the global south, but across the world as compared to China. One might hear it from, say, Lithuanians, one might hear it from Africans. It's just that we don't have the deep pockets which China has. India needs to leverage its own economic growth. How does China curtail that? China became as powerful as it is today, riding on its economic growth. It fears India would do the same. So, how best can it be thwarted? By propping up these irritants such as Pakistan. So, all in all, we have a very deep alignment with the US when it comes to actually countering China. It's not like India started, with these sorts of efforts to push China, but over and over again, China has chosen conflict over cooperation, especially with India. So actually, there's an alignment with Trump's very hawkish stance under his second Trump. So the Quad is likely to deepen its role as a counterbalance to China's military and economic expansions, which is very visibly seen in the focus that the Quad has on maritime and joint military exercises like the Malabar. Prime Minister Modi has positioned India as a leader in the Quad, emphasizing its role as, and I quote him, force for good in the Indo-Pacific. What does force for good mean? Who is it aimed at? The bad force. Right? Fortunately or unfortunately, the US is not yet a force for bad in the Indo-Pacific. It might have been during the Vietnam War, but currently it is not. Neither is Australia. Which one is the force for bad? And what's this juxtapositioning we are doing when we call ourselves the force for good? So there's this huge alignment. India is going to host the 2025 Quad Leaders Summit. It's going to only amplify the stance which India has about India being the force for good with newer initiatives on maritime patrols and on disaster. There's also going to be enhanced military and defense cooperation. During Trump's first term, the US and India had signed key agreements like the LEMOA, Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement, the COMCASA, etc., to boost military interoperability. Trump 2.0 has announced expanded US military sales to India, including potential F-35s, fighter jets, and a 10-year defense partnership framework under the US India Compact for the 21st century. These moves will strengthen the Quad's collective defense capabilities. Then there's Malabar and beyond. The Quad's naval exercises, particularly Malabar, they've grown in scope with Australia's inclusion in 2020. That marked a milestone. Under Modi 3.0 and Trump 2.0, these exercises will expand, potentially involving non-Quad partners like Vietnam or South Korea. Then there's an Indian Ocean focus. The launch of the Indian Ocean Strategic Venture, which was announced during Prime Minister Modi's February visit to Washington, D.C., aims to enhance connectivity and security in the region. This aligns with Quad's broader goal of ensuring freedom of navigation and countering China's BRI. Okay. Then there's going to be huge expanded technology and economic collaboration, critical technologies, AI, computing, all of these are things which Prime Minister Modi also says. Why is the US also focusing? on technology, economic collaboration. In January and we heard this about this great deep sea rise, right? And as to how it's going to change the world. For the US, the problem was that it led to the crumbling of stocks of Nvidia and so on. Also, it had stolen certain technologies from the tech companies in the US. So there's a tech rivalry. There's no tech rivalry per se with India, right? But when these sorts of AI actually get used, there's a normalization of a certain narrative that Aksai Chin belongs to China. I don't know if any of you had gone through these multiple posts on as to how if you ask certain questions on name the states of India, DeepSeek says no answer. Why does it say so? Because you'll have to start with Arunachal Pradesh, right? In the list, Arunachal has to come first, right? So it simply doesn't give the answer. Now, say if we normalize this, say in the next 20 years, the future generations start using this sort of a technology, what gets embedded in the psyche? Arunachal is not India's, right? So that's another problematic arena. Or unleashing partographic aggression, using those stupid maps, delusional maps, showcasing to Indian youth. And we have a youth bunch, right? So that's also a challenge. So we need to counter all of that. Can we come up with tech like DeepSeek or, I don't know, Grok and so on? The time is not yet there, but we have, it's India has a huge capability for innovation or for indigenization. So there's this complementarity. Over and above that, one major point is about rare earth metals. Right? Now, rare earth metals will be used in all sorts of things like semiconductors, to my glasses, to the screen, to laptops, and so on. Now, China sits on 97% of the production of rare earth metals, right? Of the production. It doesn't sit on 97% reserves of rare earth metals. It's just that it has an advantage in production. Now, if China can arm twist other countries and not give us rare earth metals, what happens? A lot of us won't have glasses. Okay, that's just in a lighter way. But we also don't have semiconductors, a lot of things. Back in 2010, when the Senkaku Islands dispute flared up between Japan and China, China had arm twisted Japan by stopping the exports of rare earth metals. Right? What could Japan do? And China didn't do it formally because then it will be seen as an irresponsible player, right? Because it's an autocracy, it can command and control its own companies. So companies stopped exporting rare earth metals. Okay. So when the export stops, how do you think the Japanese economy is going to behave? What's going to be the impact? Right? Japan is a high-tech industry economy, right? So there was a problem. It got arm twisted. So India came in. We said that look, we can do certain sorts of reverse engineering, dig out batteries and so on from trash, reverse engineer, give you a bit of rare earth metals. But beyond that, we cannot. So even back in 2010, we should have realized that China is going to arm twist each country which relies on tech. India does a lot as well. So now, cut to 2024, cut to 2025. The fact is that the boxing gloves are off, right? China will do what it has to do because it sees itself as the leader of the international system. Okay. Okay, have your rivalry with the US. But the problem also is that it covets India's territories, it covets India's markets, it unleashes Pakistan, and so on, right? So it's a problem for us also, right? So if we cannot build our innovation, our critical tech, it's going to be a problem. Rare earth metals are there in India also. Rare earth metals are there in the US also. In fact, mining used to happen in the US, at least in the 1970s and 1980s. In India, in the sands of Kerala, or or in the soil of Jharkhand, there is rare earth metals. But we had yeah. Yes. 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 Yeah.
The sad part is the extraction is almost non-existent.
Extraction, because it might lead to certain human rights violations, and as democracies we can't that because well,
Technology is also an issue.
yeah, technology also, yeah, it's also an issue. So if we can push for it, there is a quad-wide initiative called the Indus Innovation Platform. It's modeled after the Indus X to foster industry and academic partnerships. So one has to keep, finding ways forward, because only if we keep trying, we will someday find a solution. It's not like China also had its solutions from day one. It also worked on it. Now it's a malicious, aggressive actor, so that's the sad part of it. Supply chain resilience is something which each partner in the Quad is looking at. And India emerges as very important in this because there's a China plus one strategy, right? Vietnam and India are generally mentioned when we say the China plus one strategy. Business is moving away from China. Okay, fair enough. Vietnam is touted as being better than India. When I go to Vietnam, India is touted as better than being Vietnam. So no one really knows. The fact also is there's a huge complementarity. There's a huge um, opportunity here for India. Unfortunately, Vietnam has been slapped with 54% tariff from the US. Why? Because China was rerouting its supplies through Vietnam. Things like electric vehicles, Chinese chips, etc., were blocked not just under Trump but also under Biden. Similarly, in the EU. So China was rerouting all of it through Vietnam, right? Put a made in Vietnam tag on it, said, but look, sooner or later countries do find out. Now, Trump, in his whatever he does, he did it in he slapped 54% tariffs. Here's the opportunity for us. We've not let our market be misused that way by China. Right? So there's another complementarity which emerges. And when we have these groupings like Quad, of course, these discussions come up. There's economic connectivity as well. Quad's response to China's infrastructure dominance, these meta multi-billion dollar undersea cable initiatives, all of these enhance digital connectivity across Indo-Pacific. That's something which India definitely benefits from, and US also will. Also, it will help in unleashing further trade. Okay, I will quickly come to Quad and counterterrorism, and maybe we can discuss more during the Q&A. Unfortunately, we've been struck again by this malicious terror sponsoring state, which gets a lot of support from the CPC-led or the CCP-led China. And as Sir had also mentioned, even at the UN, the mention of the TRF was diluted. This is not something new which has happened to us. China has done this earlier also. Now, it's just that in 1971, it wasn't a terrorist or a non-state actor which was involved, but yeah, state actors were involved. There was Pakistan. India helped in the liberation of Bangladesh. China actually back then was saying that it will, officially it was not supporting any side, right? But A, it gave arsenals, Pakistan. B, at the UN, it was diluting a lot of these pronouncements, a lot of these documents. So, this comes from the Chinese playbook. What China has done now with regards to the TRF, it's nothing new. So, what do we do in the realm of counterterrorism as far as the Quad goes? See, the Quad emphasizes a free and open Indo-Pacific maritime security, countering China's influence. But the fact also is that counterterrorism is an integral part of the broad security agenda, given the shared interests of its members in addressing regional and global threats. Let's look at some of these official commitments. The Quad's joint statements, including those from 2024 and 2025 leader summits, explicitly address counterterrorism. The group had condemned terrorism in all forms. It called for an adherence to UN Security Council resolutions, example UNSCR 1373. It emphasized preventing the use of territory for terrorist activities. The 2025 joint statement from the foreign ministers meeting in Washington reaffirmed commitment to strengthening regional resilience against terrorism. All Quad members face terrorism risks. India, we have a Pakistan. It's unfortunate to be geographically placed right next to a terrorist country. Pakistan-based groups like LET, Jaish-e-Mohammed, they have been active, and unfortunately, they're going to be active for the foreseeable future. The US prioritizes global counterterrorism, especially post 9/11. In fact, there was a statement, I mentioned it. I think today morning there was a statement from Republican lawmaker Rick McCormick, who's the co-chair of the India Caucus's grouping in the US House of Representatives, and he had said that US has to make a choice if it wants to choose jihadi terrorists sponsoring Pakistan, or if it wants to actually understand a partner's woes, which is India. Right. So there is that awareness. How well we can push for it, it's up to us, of course. Okay. Quickly coming to bilateral synergies. India's counterterrorism cooperation with the US, especially under Modi 3.0, has been strengthened. It has included joint working groups and exercises like youth abhyas and so on. And our MEA is right now talking to the US also, enlisting the hazards of having a jihadi terrorism sponsoring state next to us and what can be done through collaboration. Um, During Trump's first term, 2017 to 2021, counterterrorism it had a key focus. There was the elimination of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Trump 2.0 with hawkish appointees like Rubio, Secretary of State, irrespective of what he says to signal that there should be peace and whatever, they would maintain this sort of emphasis, especially in regions like Afghanistan and Pakistan, where terrorist groups also threatened US interests. Quad meeting context. Quad foreign ministers meeting, which was hosted by Rubio, included counterterrorism in the agenda. There was also a focus on preventing terrorism financing and radicalization through online platforms. There have been rumblings that we're going to discuss the abuse of the cyberspace for using disinformation, interfering in elections. There's a very big likelihood, given the fact that we have suffered at the hands of Pakistan again this time, and and the Quad is going to be held in India. There's going to be a huge push for counterterrorism and to prevent the usage of funding. India is also reaching out right now to the IMF and World Bank to review the funding which Pakistan gets. So this is going to come up, and it's a good platform. It's a good opportunity which India should prepare for and use. Um, certain There are certain counterterrorism initiatives which have taken place in the past. There's been intelligence and information sharing. Quad has explored mechanisms for sharing counterterrorism intelligence, especially on threats like the ISIS Khorasan in Afghanistan. India's expertise in tackling cross-border terrorism and the US's global intelligence networks are key assets. Second, cybersecurity and counter-radicalization. The Quad has a focus on the digital dimension, focusing on countering radicalization, protecting critical infrastructure from cyber attacks, and so on. The 2025 joint statement also highlighted this. Then the Quad also supports regional partners in Southeast Asia through training and technical assistance to combat terrorism. Um, then there's a humanitarian lens as well. The Quad's counterterrorism efforts, which so far have been talked about just with regards to HADR, can also be taken forward by India. Because, well, why not? It's going to be hosted in India. There are certain challenges and limitations, and that's why India should focus on how can we, include more focus on counterterrorism in the Quad. First focus is that it's a secondary priority. Counterterrorism is a lower priority compared to Quad's focus on China. Second, there are diverging interests. India prioritizes, countering Pakistan-linked terrorism. US has a focus on global jihadist networks. Japan and Australia have less direct exposure. They also suffer, but they have less direct exposure. Aligning these priorities, understanding where we can cooperate, using the sort of language or the parlance which can evoke a similar response from all four is something which India will have to prepare for. Then, most importantly, there's China's narrative, because this PRC it talks about the Quad as an anti-China bloc, which can complicate also this counter-terrorism outreach, especially to global South nations. India's insistence that the Quad is not against anyone, it aims to mitigate this, but it might just dilute the counter-terrorism messaging. How do we navigate this? Again, before the Quad meeting happens is something that India should be prepared for. India should maybe create some talking points. I will just quickly come to the conclusion. Okay. So what are the priorities right now for Modi 3.0 as far as the Quad goes? There is, of course, countering China. While we hear a lot about how US is countering China, tariffs, etc. India has also been slapping tariffs on China. Right? I think if you just track Piyush Goyalji's statements in the last 2 months, there's a plethora of statements. We've introduced a lot of tariffs on Chinese goods. We have to protect our own economy further from Chinese dumping. Right? India, in any case, is the country which drags China to the WTO the most number of times annually for dumping. India already does that. So we are aware, right? But now there's also a problem. There is Pakistan, and Pakistan's terrorism is backed by China. How do we get all of that in the Quad? Look, it's still linked to China. Right? Trump 2.0 also has a China focus. He also has countering jihadist terrorism focus. We need to align, right? Um, I think I'll just end it with the fact that we need to think about how counterterrorism so far has been secondary to the Quad's China-centric goals. How do we make it priority? Maybe using the same sort of lens that China supports Pakistan. You know, destabilizing India's economy will not help the US or Australia or Japan. Something on those lines. And the Quad Leaders Summit in 2025 is definitely going to be a big opportunity to advance a lot of efforts in maritime security, in HADR, economic partnerships, technological partnerships, and hopefully in counterterrorism as well. So I'm just going to end it here, and I hope I did not exceed the timing. And thank you so much.